Hello there and welcome back to Forza Top Gear Lap's Rivals, the spin-off where we pit a couple of cars with common ground and close PIs against each other to see which one comes out on top. Today we are taking a look at two American icons from two different eras. Firstly, the Chevrolet Bel Air. The Bel Air, or more specifically this 1957 model, was and is one of the most recognisable, desirable and iconic cars of its era, and on the face of it, it really isn't hard to see why. The Bel Air is unquestionably a looker. It manages to ooze style and the excess of the 50s. There's chrome, fins and a streamlined body, and yet the Bel Air is tastefully restrained and not over the top, unlike several of its contemporaries. Despite this, the Bel Air isn't a unique car. Instead, Bel Air is essentially the top trim level of Chevrolet's full-size sedan of the time, and as a result, buyers had plenty of options to spec their Bel Air to their liking, with everything from power seats, windows and antenna, to a tissue dispenser and seat belts. For body styles, you had everything from the traditional 4-door saloon to the odd Nomad wagon to the convertible and 2-door coupe, which these days are the most sought after. Speaking of sought after, and this generation of Chevrolet would see the introduction of the legendary small block V8 engine, available in multiple versions. This car features the 283 cubic inch Super Turbo Fire version, with 4-barrel carburetors, although fuel injection was an option, making for 283 horsepower, meaning 1 horsepower per cubic inch. This power could be directed through 3 choices of transmission, although this car features the 2-speed automatic known as Power Glide. While it didn't outsell the Ford it was up against, the 57 Chevrolet proved popular, with over 1.5 million sold, with almost half of them being Bel Airs. From classy cruiser to NASCAR missile, it was all things to all men, and you'd be hard pressed to find another car that defines 1950s America quite like this one. Next up, the Jeep Wrangler. While the Bel Air defines 1950s America, the modern Wrangler defines modern day America. The JK or third generation Wrangler launched in 2007. And while it looks similar under the skin, the Wrangler was all new, designed to be much easier to live with and to improve its mass appeal while keeping its off-road credibility. The biggest change made was the introduction of a 4-door model, which would eventually make up 75% of sales, although the classic 2-door style remained. Another controversial change was the swap from the highly dependable AMZ engines to the 3.6 litre Pentastar V6 found in almost every Chrysler of the time. While not as popular, the Pentastar offered a massive power increase over the elderly AMZ 4 litre. This was then paired with a 6-speed manual or a 5-speed automatic transmission. Still, while it may seem more domesticated, off-road fans were not forgotten. Called the Rubicon, this was the off-road ready version with 32-inch BF Goodrich tyres, Dana 44 axles, and a Rock-Track 4-wheel drive system with low-range transfer case, as well as a front sway bar that can be disengaged on command. The result was fantastic off-road performance, and this being a Jeep, the aftermarket support means you can build the go-anywhere machine of your dreams. While the purists cried, the JK Wrangler was a massive hit, with a 12-year production run eventually being replaced by the JL Wrangler, which has continued the massive success of the modern day Wrangler. So there you go, two cars that perfectly define the era of America they come from. The question is, were things really better back in the day? Let's find out. Onto the track then, and we begin with the fantastic 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, 220 horsepower, 300 foot-pounds torque, 3,337 pounds of weight. This is the torquiest car here today, and it is also the lightest by a fair margin, both of which are kind of surprising considering. But there you go. Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan of the Bel Air. Something about the way this car looks just really appeals to me. I do prefer the 4-door version, and I do have to say you definitely need to get it in this blue and not the red. But other than that, yeah, the Bel Air is absolutely fantastic. I just love it, and driving this thing in Forza is an experience. Basically, the Bel Air's issue has, and always will be for as long as it continues to be in this spec in Forza, is the 2-speed automatic transmission, which this car does have. Now, essentially what that means is first gear runs up to about 40 miles an hour, I think it is, and then your second gear the entire way through. What that means is you're pretty much always riding on the torque. While there's a good amount of torque here, it's not necessarily good for getting you out of corners or anything like that, or getting you up to particularly massive speeds on the straights unless you get a really good run-up, which fortunately Top Gear does offer a little bit of that. Other than that though, it is pretty much as you'd expect. It is a very boaty car to drive, and the diff is a little bit iffy. But I will say, if you stick these things on race tyres with race suspension and a new gearbox, these can actually be surprisingly quick vehicles. And as far as online goes, well, you know, it's a giant car. It can be a pretty decent battering ram if you give it a good chance. But yeah, no, I love the Bel Air, but in this spec, it's not the quickest thing in the world, it has to be said. Next up, 2012 Jeep Wrangler Rubicon, 285 horsepower, 260 foot-pound torque, 4,132 pounds of weight. This is the most powerful car here today, and it's also the heaviest car here today. As you can see, a fair margin on that, a fair margin on the power as well. I will say, this Pentastar V6, while I can't imagine as an engine it's particularly much to write home about, the power figures from this for an American V6 is actually pretty good. Especially in this car. And the Wrangler Rubicon, while it weighs a fair bit, it is quite a small car, so it could make for interesting performance. The Wrangler, I kind of like the Wrangler. I sort of prefer other Jeeps. I really like the Renegade for some reason. And I know Jeeps have the silliest model names in the world, which makes them slightly more endearing. I would have preferred to get a European spec Wrangler, or more specifically a South American spec Wrangler with the VM Motors diesel in this game, but this is the Wrangler was served for kind of obvious reasons. As far as it goes to drive, it is a pretty decent vehicle to drive this. The engine's pretty lively and peppy. Handling is nowhere near as bad as you would expect. You do feel the weight in this car, and it can have issues at low speed. We found this a little bit with cars with really short wheelbases. They can have some slight struggle through low speed corners, especially being four-wheel drives with a small wheelbase. But other than that, no, the Wrangler is a pretty good vehicle. I don't know what this thing would be like upgraded, but out of the package, the Wrangler is a lot better than you'd expect it to be, and as a result, the Wrangler was the quickest car of the day, going into 440th place with a 134.215, beats out Skyline, which is going to irritate some people. Holden Monaro beats out an SVT Raptor, which is kind of interesting. Interesting thing to note is it is actually slightly down on the Jeep CJ5 Renegade, which is an older Jeep, although it's much less terrifying to drive. In 452nd place we find the Chevrolet Bel Air with a 135.153. Not all that much to compare it to around here. It is quicker than a Ford Crown Victoria, which is kind of interesting, and it is slightly off of a Pontiac Firebird Trans Am, which sort of proves how sad the Trans Am's performance is, as much as I love that car. Another interesting thing to note about the Bel Air is the Plymouth Fury, which I believe shares the same chassis, has the upgraded engine and a better gearbox, with it being the 3-speed, is actually 4 and a bit seconds quicker. While the Bel Air is nicer to drive, the Fury is obviously a lot quicker, which is kind of interesting, as it proves that the Bel Air really can be quite a quick car, with a few minor upgrades made to it. As far as a conclusion for today, it's kind of obvious. The Bel Air is the car I would have out of these two. There's just something about it that I really like. I'm not usually a fan of cars of this vintage, but the styling for me really clicks with the Bel Air. It comes in a bunch of fantastic colours, and it's a big cruiser, which I really like. It also offers a very unique driving experience in Forza, with it only being a 2-speed automatic. So yeah, that would be the car I'd have, although the Jeep certainly shouldn't go unnoticed or unsaid, because that car actually drives pretty darn well, considering what it is, and it really can topple some of the Goliaths in its class. Anyways, thank you all very much for watching this edition of Forza Top Gear Labs The Rivals. Join us next time for the main full episode, which is going to be on Australasian vehicles, and then join us for Rivals, where we're going to take a look at an Aussie versus American muscle racers showdown. Join us for that. Until then, farewell.
Dreams are going. I won't let you back. Got up in a war that you are not part of. Eyes on the slit of your father with love.